And while it may look on the outside different because of the environment they teach in, a lot of the things that they do are very, very familiar to classroom teachers. And so what I did was I came up with a framework that I called the National Park Classroom that breaks down what they do, or the what of education on parks.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech podcast button at the top of the page. Today's episode is sponsored by my new free quiz, Unlock the Best Way to Use Chatbots in Your Teaching. This quick 5-question quiz will help you figure out the best way to use AI this school year. Find out if AI can support your instructional planning and help you tackle your to-do list. Everyone who takes the quiz will also get a free ebook. Head to classtechtips.com/quiz to find my new quiz. Unlock the best way to use chatbots in your teaching. That's classtechtips.com/quiz. This week's episode is titled Project-Based Learning Inspired by National Parks with James Fester, and I'm excited to welcome back James to the podcast. We talk about themes from his new book, The National Park Classroom from ISTE, that's coming out this March. Let's dive into the conversation. Welcome back to the Easy EdTech podcast. I am so excited to have you back on today to talk about a handful of things, including your new book and really unpacking what it means to explore project-based learning inspired by national parks. So before we get into all of that, can you share a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Absolutely. So right now, my 9 to 5 is working for an organization, PBL Works. It's a nonprofit that's based out of California. It used to be known as the Buck Institute for Education. And we work with schools and teachers and districts to build their capacity for high quality project-based learning. We've been doing it for 35 years, along with, supported by a cadre of really incredible educators from across the country who just go out and work with teachers and help inspire them to create exceptional learning experiences for their students. So I've been lucky enough to be with this organization since 2015. About 3 years ago, I started in a full-time capacity for them. And that's more or less what I get to do now daily, just travel around and get to work with teachers from all over the globe, actually, helping them to bring project-based learning to their students. And outside of that work, I do a couple of different things. I do a lot of writing. I'm a pretty regular writer for Edutopia. Obviously, I've got a second book coming out from ISTE, which is super exciting, and do a little bit of writing for a couple other organizations as well, National Geographic and a couple of other blogs too. The outside of that work, or the other work that I do, in addition to the writing, I also get to work with public lands organizations. So national parks, state parks, sometimes zoos, museums, things, different entities that are a part of what I like to call our educational ecosystem. They're not brick and mortar schools or traditional classrooms. They are the educational opportunities that are available to the general public outside of what we think of as a traditional school system. And I get to do some work with them to help them strengthen their educational offerings as well. So that's really what I do. And it's awesome, fabulous work. And I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk more about it.
Yeah. And, talk more today together, right? Because we had a chance to talk about your first book and some of the work that you're doing, right, in this space. As I've shared, I think in our conversation last time and in other conversations on the podcast, I, like many people, I'm a big fan of the national parks. We've got a passport here in the house, a long list of places that I know I've visited that have really been life-changing experiences, right? To put it mildly. And so would love for you to start by sharing the inspiration behind the new book, The National Park Classroom, and how your experiences with National Park shape the ideas that people will find in the book.
Awesome. Yeah, I would love to. The inspiration for the book came from, actually, it was my second year or my third year in the classroom. I was a middle school teacher in California, and during the week, I taught in a very traditional classroom using very traditional methods. And that was kind of what I did during the week. But on the weekend, I was a volunteer for the California State Park system. And I would basically go out to, it was a state park, Angel Island State Park, which is in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. Have you been there?
I haven't been to that one, but I'm familiar with some of the California parks, like digital stuff. Yeah. So that's why I'm excited here as you're sharing here. Yeah.
They do. And they have some fantastic digital resources as well that we should definitely connect all of your listeners to. I always described Angel Island as the island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay that's not Alcatraz. Yeah. And that's where I got to work. And groups of people would come, and they would come looking to explore the island. A lot of them would come wanting to learn more about its incredible history, and I would get to take them on tours and show them around and conduct programs. And what I realized was that I taught one way in my brick and mortar classroom, but a different way when I was out with groups on the island. And I started to kind of allow my weekends to come into my weekdays, because what I noticed was when I would bring resources or strategies or different things from my weekend work with the park into the classroom, I got incredible results, especially from the students who didn't play the traditional games very well. My students that were the ones that were struggling or didn't really always give me their attention, the ones that really, that a regular school or a regular classroom wasn't really helping them be successful, really gravitated towards this other kind of stuff. And so what I wanted to do was create or write a book that more or less bridges the gap between these two educational worlds that I inhabited, because I really do believe that classroom teachers can benefit a lot from the resources, the strategies, and just the day-to-day of their educational counterparts in parks. And that's what this book is. It's what classroom teachers can benefit, how classroom teachers can benefit from the great work that's going on in our public land spaces.
Yeah. And just, there not a lot of people get to have kind of experiences at the same time, right, of teaching. Mm-hmm. There might be different parts of your career where you're teaching in different spaces, but to really have that side by side, like you described, I think is a really wonderful way to reflect on what's working, what's exciting, where whoever that group might be, right, who's, more engaged with the content. So what are some of the teaching methods used in the national parks that can be easily adapted to a traditional classroom setting?
Yeah, and that was actually the first challenge that I had, because when I would share things with teachers, that would say resources or methods that they would use, strategies they would use, the different kinds of things that made up the what and the how of education that a park ranger is so familiar with. A lot of times teachers would kind of be standoffish, or they would give me the raised eyebrow, because they would say, well, those people aren't teachers. And I would kind of bite my tongue and squint a little bit, because they really are. Their education, that they deal with some things that their environment perhaps is a little bit different than a classroom with desks, but they are educators in their own right who are highly skilled at what they do, that come from their own very rich educational tradition. And while it may look on the outside different because of the environment they teach in, a lot of the things that they do are very, very familiar to classroom teachers. And so what I did was I came up with a framework that I called the National Park Classroom that breaks down what they do, or the what of education on parks, the what and the how, into 6 different elements to make it more palatable and more recognizable. And so a lot of the things that I talk about in my book and I discuss in my book, the things that I see or observed that were extremely effective when I would either go to a park and go to a ranger program or go to a park and engage in educational learning. They call them something different sometimes. They're sometimes called different things, but they're very, very similar to terms that classroom teachers would be very familiar with. The idea of place-based learning, of inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, the idea of culturally responsive pedagogy and teaching. All of these things are present and are used by park rangers. They just do it a little bit differently. And so at the end of the day, what I wanted to show was all of the things that you're doing, all of these challenges that you have with your students are the same challenges that these park rangers deal with every day. And this is a great opportunity for both worlds to kind of expand their toolbox of approaches. And so a couple of specifics that are worth mentioning. So the most, and again, I'm going to go into a couple of terms that might be a little bit unfamiliar, depending on who you ask. Like if you go to a national park this weekend and you talk about some of these things, you'll probably have some success if you talk to park rangers. But one term is called interpretation. And interpretation is the pedagogical method that a park ranger uses to connect visitors to the resources in the park from which education and learning experiences come from. One of the things that they kind of lean into is this idea of an audience-centered experience. The idea that all of the learning and all of the learning should come from this kind of horizontal or shared two-way communication between the ranger and the group. So so they do a lot of things, like a lot of protocols or thinking routines that might be very familiar. Things like think, pair, share. That's something that you would see actually and probably recognize if you saw it in a park ranger program. They do a lot of things with visuals. They do a lot of dialogic questioning, where very rarely will they start off a program with a lecture. What they'll do instead is try to start with a big open-ended question to elicit responses from the audience. These are things that a lot of teachers know how to do. They just do it a little bit differently because they have different resources and because they have different learning objectives. But learning about what park rangers do, or even if the next time you go to a park yourself, finding out when the programs are and kind of just observing the types of things that you see a park ranger do. Every time I do that, I come away with 2-3 different strategies that I then pass on to the teachers I work with. And it's really a fun and incredible way of kind of, mix. I might be there for, going on a hike or some recreational purpose, but there's nothing that says that I can't bring things back to my own classroom at the same time.
Especially when you are there, with a couple hats on, right? Like, yes, you're there to hike, right? Or to picnic, right? Or to spend time with family. But if you are in one of these programs, right, you've got the learner hat on, and then you also have your facilitator, right? Or I'm here for some tips, right? That observer hat on. And so I think it's a really interesting way to be reflective, to be curious, right? To gather ideas, right? When you're in a physical space that, like you mentioned, might be very different, than a classroom, someone listening here leads themselves. And so as we think, beyond, say, a one-day activity or something that might happen in an isolated, or smaller moment, project-based learning is central to your book. So, how can educators incorporate that approach, right, as they're thinking about some of the challenges they might face, those instructional challenges in their own classrooms?
For sure. I think so. National parks are the greatest and usually untapped educational resource available to teachers. I mean, our tax dollars all pay for all of this stuff, and very rarely do teachers know that they can take advantage of it because they just don't know what's available. When you think about a project-based learning experience, you think about students engaging in inquiry or research. You think about students connecting with outside experts. You think about them incorporating research or data into the challenges and the big questions they're trying to investigate. You think about the number of resources that teachers have to pull that they need to make sure are academically sound and accurate, that are developmentally appropriate for their students. A lot of times project-based learning a lot of times PBL projects incorporate lessons that look more traditional as parts of learning experiences that lead to the finish of these products. Now, that's a lot of stuff that a teacher is responsible for. And a lot of those things are the barriers that prevent teachers from actually engaging in PBL. It's not that they don't think it's valuable. It's not that they don't think it's it is a research-backed and proven pedagogy. We've got the data. It's available out there. People can look at it. But it's the time that really that really keeps a lot of educators from engaging in it. Wouldn't it be nice if there was one place or one organization that you could go to that could give you all of those things and just hand them over to you for free, and you could trust that they were coming from educationally minded or, data informed places, that it wasn't just random stuff coming from Yahoo Answers, but it was stuff that was vetted by experts? And the answer is there is. And if you go to nps.gov and you go to the teacher portal, you can find all of those things I just mentioned. You can virtually connect with park rangers. Almost every national park unit or every national park you can think of has a dedicated team that provides distance learning programs. They've been doing it even before COVID, but since then it really kicked off because they were able to really increase their capacity because people couldn't visit the parks or leave their houses. And so there's been kind of this renaissance in terms of distance learning. They have something like 11,000 printable lesson plans, all aligned to national standards frameworks like the NGSS, the Common Core. They have their own blogs and educational journals that produce scientific research that are producing, resources for cultural and historical studies as well. All of these things are available. You just sometimes need a little bit of help, which is what I hope this book is going to be, a little bit of help finding where they are, because they're a little bit hidden, but once you find them and once you make those connections, a lot of the work is already done for you. And that's one thing that I really hope people take away from this book is that, yes, you can do project-based learning. And if the time is the biggest barrier, it doesn't have to be if you find great places and great park rangers to collaborate with, because a lot of that can be taken care of for you.
I love all those digital resources that you mentioned that people can go to, the National Park Service's website. They can connect with a particular park, right? That might come back to one of their goals, right? In their classroom, that there's all these virtual experiences for kids too. So I think for someone who's listening who might feel like we can't go there, right? Of course, there's nothing like being in a space, right? But there are those complementary resources or those resources that might, supplement a unit of study by taking someone virtually to these spaces. So, before I ask you a bit, to share a bit about where people can connect with you and learn about the book and all of that, if there is one piece of advice, like kind of that one thing someone could do this week or this month, right, to put some of the ideas from the book into action, what's kind of the one thing you would want them to do?
There are a whole lot of things that come to mind hearing that question, but if I was going to suggest one small, easy first step for teachers to take that eventually could become the first step on a huge or longer journey or collaboration that could really enrich their classroom or enrich the PBL projects they're already doing, I think the first thing I would say is I would direct them to the National Park Service's teacher portal. And I would tell them to go to that teacher portal. And I believe we'll make sure to share the link in the show notes, but you're going to go there and there's going to be a search bar. And the thing you're going to do is type in the theme or the topic or the learning goal for the next lesson that you're going to teach. And you're going to hit the results and you're going to see not what resources pop up, but what places pop up. So for example, if you are teaching a lesson on, let's say, food webs, you're going to type food webs into that and you're going to click on search. And there are going to be every single resource is connected to a place. And one of the things that I think is most powerful about this type of learning is this idea of place consciousness, that even if you are not physically there and you're not physically standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon or on, among the monuments at Gettysburg, that the things that you're learning in the classroom are matter and are used every day by people in these places. And when you can physically point to a map and tell students that this matters and it matters right here, and I'm going to tell you, and we're going to tell you why, that authentic connection and the fact that it actually is important, even if in a classroom it doesn't really have the same context, the fact that somewhere in the world it's being used by a professional to solve a problem or make the world a better place, knowing where that place is really important. It's also incredibly important because we know that these places, and you said yourself, Monica, that you're a big fan of national parks as well. I am also. I want them to be around so that when my kids are older, that they can go and they can have their own experiences there as well. What's going to do that is making sure that the students that we have are aware that they exist. Because I interviewed a lot of teachers and a lot of park rangers for this book. And when I would ask them, well, how did you get started with national parks? Every single one of them said that they didn't realize that they existed until somebody either mentioned it or took them there. Mm-hmm. You as the teacher could be that person that turns your kid on to the idea that a Yosemite or an Everglades or, Fort Sumter actually is a place that maybe not right now, but someday they could go and visit. And that's going to start a lifelong relationship with them and hopefully turn them into someone later on in life as an adult that will become an advocate for the conservation and protection of these places and therefore make sure that they endure and they keep going. And we need that. And we can't just leave it up to chance that like someday they'll be on a road trip and they'll see a sign that says pull off here. We've got to make sure that they actually get to do that and know why they're meaningful. And that's really why I want teachers to do this and why finding places and connecting lessons to places is so important.
Well, that's just fantastic advice to leave listeners, especially someone who's kind of looking for that first step or not really sure where to dive in just yet. So, James, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
So you can learn more about my work by going to the website for my organization. It's called the National Park Classroom. It's nationalparkclassroom.com, all one word, all lowercase. There's a lot of resources there that talk a lot about not just the book, but also the mission as well. I work with and collaborate with a network of teachers from across the country who are just like me, big advocates for our national parks and want to bring them into the classroom. And you can learn more about us and maybe even learn about joining us by doing that. You can obviously get the book as well. It's available on Amazon and ISTE.com. And because I know that we're in the winter months and it's in the cold weather, this is actually a great time of year to be looking for some of these live programs because not a lot of people are visiting national parks when they're under 6 feet of snow. And there's a great one that's coming up that Grand Teton National Park does every year. It's called Snow Desk. It's a live program that they offer every year that they stream live on YouTube that you can interact with if you sign up. So I would highly suggest you either go to the Grand Teton National Park website or give them a call and ask how you can register your class for Snow Desk because it's a fantastic program. It's free and it's a lot of fun. It's a great fun way to introduce your students to a corner of the planet they may not have visited yet.
Oh, such great advice. And I will make sure to link out so that everyone can connect with these resources, can find your great book. Thank you so much, James, for your time today. It was so much fun chatting with James today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I am a big fan of the national parks system. We've got our book with stamps and all of it here at the house. It's a theme of a lot of our travel too. And so as we think about the conversation today, I want to wrap up with a few key points from today's episode. National parks offer an untapped resource for project-based learning. Park rangers utilize techniques like Think, Pair, Share that are easily adaptable for classroom use. Place-based learning connects students to real-world locations. Many national parks offer free distance learning programs and virtual field trips. Remember, you can find the show notes and the full list of resources from this episode, including all of the ways to connect with James and grab his new book by going to classtechtips.com/podcast and finding today's episode, number 304. Today's episode is sponsored by my new free quiz, Unlock the Best Way to Use Chatbots in Your Teaching. This quick, 5-question quiz will help you figure out the best way to use AI this school year. Find out if AI can support your instructional planning and help you tackle your to-do list. Everyone who takes the quiz will also get a free ebook. Head to classtechtips.com/quiz to find my new quiz. Unlock the best way to use chatbots in your teaching. That's classtechtips.com/quiz. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.